Some AI risks arrive with a security alert. This one arrives as a productivity win when a personal productivity agent becomes part of the team's operating rhythm. A product lead builds a small agent to review feature plans. It works. It saves time. It flags engineering risks. Then the team asks to use it. The agent moves into Slack. It connects to Linear, GitHub, roadmap notes, and the shared box folder. No one approves a new operating policy. No one redesigns the product review process. And no one says, let's encode one person's judgment into how the team makes decisions. But that is what starts to happen. A private shortcut becomes a shared workflow. A correction becomes memory. And the preference becomes a pattern. That is the moment the agent changes categories. It does not have to become fully autonomous to become a governance problem. It only has to become shared. Hello, my name is Vlad Stanovsky. I write the Sovereign AI Enterprise, where I focus on agentic AI, governance, and the operating model behind enterprise AI. Today, I want to show why a personal AI agent becomes a different kind of risk the moment it becomes shared. That is the line I want to talk about today. And the wall behind me is a useful way to think about it. A single stone is just a stone. It can be moved, replaced, ignored, or corrected without changing the whole structure. But once stones are shaped, matched, stacked, and locked against each other, they become part of something load-bearing. AI agents move through the same kind of shift. A personal prompt is like a loose stone, useful, imperfect, and local. But once that prompt becomes a shared skill, once its corrections become memory, once its output lands in Slack, tickets, roadmaps, or leadership summaries, it is no longer just a loose shortcut. It has become part of the structure of work. That is when the governance question changes. Because a lot of enterprise AI governance is still aimed at the wrong moment. Organizations are preparing for the rogue agent, the autonomous agent, the agent that takes action without permission. But the more common problem may arrive earlier. A useful personal agent becomes a shared team agent. A shortcut becomes a skill. A correction becomes memory. A preference becomes a pattern. And before anyone has formally approved a new operating rule, the team is already working inside one. Hold on to that phrase. A preference becomes a pattern. That is the heart of this issue. Let's make it concrete. Imagine a product lead builds a small agent around her own work. It reads her backlog notes. It scans client calls. It checks the roadmap. It looks at open engineering issues. And before every planning meeting, it drafts a product review. At first, this is harmless. It is personal productivity. The agent is not approving releases. It is not changing client comments. It is not pushing code. It is just helping her prepare. And over time, she tunes it. She teaches it that product adoption signals matter more than internal excitement. She teaches it that engineering risk should be called out early. She teaches it that vague client interest is different from a signed expansion opportunity. And she teaches it that executives want a short summary, but architects want the trade-off underneath. So the agent becomes useful because it carries her working style, her context, her access, her habits, and her judgment. When the agent is too optimistic, she corrects it. When it misses a dependency, she adds the note. When it drafts something awkward, she rewrites it. The feedback loop is informal, but it works because the person closest to the work is also the person closest to the agent. That is why a personal agent can be governed by proximity. The users see the output. The user knows the context. The user catches many of the mistakes. And the user owns the decision. That does not make the agent safe, but it keeps the failure surface close to one person's attention and accountability. But then the team asks to use it. And the request sounds reasonable. Why should every product pod reinvent the same review? Why not give junior product managers the same structure? Why not give engineering clearer signals? And why not give leadership a more consistent summary? So the agent gets shared. But now, watch the agent category change. It is no longer reflecting one person's judgment. It is shaping the team's judgment. The same review pattern that used to be a private shortcut can now influence how features are prioritized, how risks are described, which client signals are treated as strong evidence, and which engineering concerns are escalated before release. At that point, the operating issue is not whether the agent is helpful. It is whose standards the agent is applying. And that brings us to the first major mistake enterprises make with agents. They look only at the model. The model may be impressive. It can reason through a product brief, summarize a client call, inspect a pull request, find contradictions in requirements, and draft a cleaner plan. But inside an enterprise, the model is only one part of the working system. The more important issue is what surrounds it. What the agent can see, what it is allowed to trust, what tools it can call, what systems it can change, what memory it keeps, and what evidence it preserves before its work becomes visible, actionable, or reusable. That surrounding system is the harness. The model reasons, and the harness turns reasoning into work. It supplies the context, limits the tools, controls write access, manages memory, routes the output, captures the evidence, and determines when a human has to review the result. This is why two teams can use the same model and get completely different outcomes. Let's compare them. One team has a fragile personal setup. A user opens a chat window, pastes contexts, asks for a review, copies the answer into Slack, updates the ticket manually, and tries to remember which corrections should be reused next time. The model may be strong, but the workflow depends on individual discipline. Another team uses the same model inside a governed workflow. The agent pulls from approved sources, checks the right tickets and documents, records which evidence it used, drafts the review in the right workspace, flags uncertainty, asks for approval when risk crosses the threshold, and preserves the correction for future use. Same model, different system. That is the first reset point. If the agent is personal, the harness can be loose. The user fills in the gaps. The user remembers the context, filters the answer, applies judgment, and catches many of the mistakes. But once the agent becomes shared, those gaps become institutional risk. The agent is no longer only helping one person think. It is helping the team move work through a repeatable path. And once there is a repeatable path, the enterprise has to look at a more difficult question. What exactly is being repeated? That question becomes very concrete when we look at reusable skills. Imagine the product lead creates a command for herself. /plan PM review. The command reviews a feature plan before the weekly product meeting. It checks whether the client evidence is strong enough, whether the engineering dependency is real or speculative, whether the release risk is being softened, whether the success metric is meaningful, and whether the plan needs executive attention before the team spends another sprint on it. At first, this is a private work habit. She still reads the output. She still makes the call. And she still owns the consequences. Then the command gets even sharper. She corrects it. She tells it which client signals count. She teaches it that enthusiastic comments from sales are not the same as demand from a committed buyer. She reinforces that architectural debt should be named plainly. And she pushes it to separate urgency from importance. The command is useful because it carries her judgment. Now, pause on that. Useful is not neutral. That is the second reset point. When the command is private, it is one person's review habit. But when the command is shared, it becomes a reusable pattern. So when someone adds it to the team agent in Slack, anyone can drop in a feature plan and ask for a product review. The agent responds with the same structure, the same weighting, the same escalation logic, and the same language for describing risk. At first, everyone sees the benefits. The team gets more consistent reviews. Junior product managers learn what a strong plan looks like. Engineering gets clearer signals. Leadership sees a cleaner and consistent summary. But the organization has changed something important. One person's review style has become a reusable pattern for the team. Her preferences about evidence, risk, urgency, architecture, and escalation are now embedded in a shared workflow. They may be good preferences. They may even be better than the old process, but they are still not neutral, reflecting one person's or one product's bias. A shared agent can make a judgment pattern feel procedural. It can make one way of seeing the work feel like the standard way. And over time, people may stop asking where the pattern came from. They may treat the output as the team's review logic rather than one person's encoded judgment. That is how personal AI becomes institutional behavior. No policy meeting, no operating model review, and no architecture decision. Just a useful shared agent that everyone starts trusting. This does not mean every prompt needs governance. That would be absurd. Most personal shortcuts should stay lightweight. But reusable skills that shaped shared work need ownership. If a skill affects prioritization, risk classification, release readiness, escalation, client impact, security review, or financial analysis, someone should know 5 things. Who created it? What judgment it encodes? When it was last reviewed? What evidence it uses? And when it should be revised or retired. This is the practical governance move. Not a giant committee, not a month-long review cycle. Ownership. In a personal agent, a preference is a preference. But in a shared agent, a preference can become policy. Now, let's go one level deeper. Skills are only part of the issue. Memory is where this gets more dangerous, because a personal agent remembers for one person. It may remember how that person likes a briefing structured, which accounts matter this quarter, which risks should be called out, or which product assumptions have already been challenged. That memory is useful because it saves the user from restating the same context every time. But a shared agent remembers differently. It may preserve a correction from one review and apply it to the next team's work. Or it may learn that certain client signals are strong, that certain security risks deserve escalation, that a particular architecture pattern is preferred, or that a class of objections should be treated as low priority. Some of that memory will improve the system, but some of it may distort it. The risk is not just that the agent gets something wrong, it's that the wrong pattern becomes reusable. A weak assumption can become part of the next recommendation. An outdated compliance interpretation can appear in future reviews. A shortcut used under deadline pressure can become normal. And the temporary exception can survive long after the reason for it disappeared. This is where memory stops being convenience. It becomes a governance. Enterprises should not treat agent memory as a bottomless notes field. A private correction should not automatically become team memory. A team pattern should not automatically become enterprise memory. And a project-specific exception should not become a general rule. Shared memory needs provenance. Every reusable memory needs a record of where it came from, what evidence supported it, whether it was inferred or approved, when it was last validated, where it has been reused, and how it can be corrected, superseded, or retired. These are operating questions. Without them, the enterprise has no reliable way to tell whether the agent is improving with use or accumulating institutional noise. And that is the third reset point: institutional noise. The agent may look smarter because it remembers more. But if the memory is stale, narrow, biased, or never reviewed, the system may simply become more confident in old assumptions. That is a very enterprise kind of failure. No explosion, no dramatic hallucination. Just a quiet pattern that keeps reappearing in the workflow. So what do you do before a personal agent becomes a shared agent? You do not need a governance ceremony for every experiment. But before the agent becomes part of shared work, the enterprise should know what kind of institutional behavior it is about to create. A practical way to do that is with an agent card. Think of it as the lightweight operating record for a shared agent. Before the agent scales, answer 7 questions. First, identity. Who does the agent act as? A user, a team, a service account, a bounded agent identity? That choice determines what the agent can see, what it can touch, and who is accountable when it acts. Second, authority. Can it only summarize? Can it recommend? Can it write to systems, open tickets, trigger workflows, or affect clients, employees, infrastructure, money, or compliance? The enterprise needs to know the difference. Third, memory. What can it remember? What stays private? What becomes team memory? And what can be corrected, rejected, superseded, or retired? Fourth, skills. Which reusable skills does it use? Who owns them? What judgment do they encode? And when were they last reviewed? Fifth, evaluation. How do you test quality, drift, regression, policy adherence, cost, and recurring failure patterns? A shared agent needs more than user satisfaction. Sixth, escalation. When does the agent stop, ask for approval, route to a human, or flag uncertainty? Escalation is not a weakness. It is how the enterprise keeps judgment attached to accountable people. Seventh, life cycle. Who owns the agent over time, and who updates it, reviews memory, manages skill drift, watches access exceptions, and retires it? That is the practical test. Identity, authority, memory, skills, evaluation, and life cycle. If no one owns those 7 things, the enterprise may not notice when the agent stops reflecting an approved way of working. The agent may still look useful. It may still produce coherent output, and it may still save time. But underneath, it may be carrying institutional behavior no one formally approved. That brings us to the control plane. I want to keep this part simple. Once agents become shared, governance cannot live only inside prompts, skill files, or team habits. A personal prompt can be messy because one person absorbs the mess. A shared agent needs a durable control layer around it. The enterprise has to know who the agent is acting for, what it is allowed to do, which memories it can reuse, which skills are approved, what evidence it must leave behind, and when it has to stop. That is the role of the control plane. It is not another agent, it is the layer that governs the conditions under which agents can act. Identity, authority, memory, evidence, policy, exceptions, monitoring, and shutdown. That is the control plane. This becomes more important as models improve, because better reasoning does not remove the need for control. It can make the need sharper. A weak agent fails close to the user. That is contained. But a capable shared agent can move farther before anyone notices the pattern it is applying. It can touch more systems, reuse more memory, route more work, and make its output feel procedural because it is coherent. And that is why shared agents need controls outside the agent's own judgment. A product review agent may be allowed to summarize evidence, identify risks, and propose next steps. But it should not be able to rewrite release criteria, change a client commitment, approve an exception, or create a new reusable rule without review. The control plane exists to make those boundaries enforceable. So here's the simplest way to say the whole thing. Sharing is the first governance threshold. Autonomy comes later. If an agent stays personal, one person can absorb more of the mess. But once the agent becomes shared, its habits can become team memory. Its skills can become workflow. Its preferences can become policy. And its output can begin shaping how the organization sees work. That can make the enterprise better. It can reduce repeated work, spread good practices, and help teams move with more consistency. But it can also create institutional machinery no one designed. Old assumptions carried forward, temporary exceptions remembered as rules, one person's judgment made procedurals, and patterns normalized because the agent repeats them with confidence. The point is not to slow every agent down with process. The point is to know when an agent has crossed from personal productivity into shared infrastructure. That is the line enterprises need to watch. And the next version of this problem shows up in software delivery. Coding agents can help developers move faster, but production work still runs through provisioning, security, compliance, network configuration, testing, deployment, automation, rollback, and operational ownership. A coding agent can write code. It still has to pass through the enterprise machinery that makes software safe to ship. That is the next video in the Sovereign AI Enterprise.
The data flows, a constant stream, shaping futures, chasing every dream. Complex patterns and sights unseen, a new era, sharp and keen. The world is changing, can you feel the pulse? A deeper vision beyond every impulse. Enterprise, geopolitics, AI.